The envelope is cream-colored, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on a birthday card. It sits in the center of my Aunt Preethi's dining room table. The table she refinished herself 4 years ago because she said the mahogany had earned its scratches and didn't need to be replaced, just tended to. Around that table sit my parents, my uncle Vikram, and a lawyer named Gerald Osei who has driven 40 minutes from the city and brought with him a manila folder, a notary stamp, and a stillness that fills the room the way cold air fills a house when someone leaves a window open in January. My mother's hands are folded in her lap. My father is looking at the window. Gerald Osei opens the folder. And that's when everything my family had been sure of for 11 months begins, quietly and irreversibly, to come apart. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales. I'm going to tell you about a woman named Nalini, about a table, and about the very specific way that people who believe they've won will sometimes hand you the instrument of their own undoing. If that's the kind of story you need today, and I think it might be, subscribe before we go any further. You won't want to miss the end of this one. My name is Devi Subramaniam, and I am a licensed structural engineer. I have been one for 14 years. I assess load-bearing walls, soil compaction, foundation settlement. I determine what a structure can hold and what it cannot. It is work that rewards patience and precision and punishes assumptions. I mention this because it shaped how I saw everything that happened, and how I waited. My grandmother, Nalini Subramaniam, lived 11 kilometers from my apartment in a house that smelled of cardamom and old paper. She was 81 years old, and had been widowed for 2 decades. She had grown up in a 2-room house in Tamil Nadu with no electricity until she was 9, had immigrated with my grandfather in 1974 with $400 and 2 suitcases, and had spent the following 40 years doing precisely what she said she would do, making sure her children never knew what hungry felt like. My parents and my uncle Vikram took this as their due. I took it as a lesson. Every Sunday, I drove to Pati's house. I brought groceries. I sat at her kitchen table, dark mahogany, scored along one edge where she'd once set down a cast iron pan. While she made rasam from scratch, the thin peppery broth she said was the only thing her own mother had taught her that she'd never improved upon. We ate together. We talked. She told me about the neighborhood in 1981, about the garden she'd had before her knees made kneeling impossible, about my grandfather's bad jokes and worse singing. My parents visited at Diwali, sometimes at her birthday. Vikram called when he needed something. Nalini told me once, while we were washing up, the ones who take the most from you are always the ones most certain they deserve it. I didn't ask her to explain. I just kept drying the dishes. When Patti fell and fractured her hip in October, it was me who drove her to Mercy General and sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. It was me who spoke to Dr. Chandra about the surgery, about the recovery protocol, about the likelihood of full mobility restoration. 62%, he said, for a woman her age and condition. He said it like it was a consolation. I wrote it down in my notebook. 62%. Then I wrote, find her the best physiotherapist within 15 kilometers. My parents arrived at the hospital the following morning. My mother's first question was not about the surgery. It was about the house. We should discuss arrangements, she said. She can't be alone. She won't be, I said. You can't do it yourself. You have a job. I know what I have. That was when my mother said the thing she'd apparently been considering since she'd gotten off the highway. Your father and I have been talking. If Alma comes to stay with us, it makes sense for us to have access to her accounts. For management. For care costs. She said management. She said care costs. She said it in the hospital hallway, 14 hours after her mother's hip surgery. And I noticed that her voice had the particular flatness of a person reciting something rehearsed. I said, Patti can speak for herself. She's 81, Devi. And fully lucid. I'd be careful about the arguments you're building. My mother's jaw tightened. It was the closest she ever came to losing composure in a semi-public space. They held a family dinner the following week to discuss Alma's future. The invitation was relayed through my uncle Vikram, who added, as if reading from a list, that it would be helpful if I came, without the attitude. I remember standing at my kitchen counter reading his text, and thinking about what Patti had said about the ones who take the most always being the most certain. I went. Because Patti asked me to come, and because she said it with the specific weight of a woman who has decided something and needs a witness. The dinner was at my parents' house. My mother had cooked biryani, the elaborate Sunday version, with whole spices and ghee and saffron. The kind of meal that signals occasion. Or ownership. Patti sat at the far end of the table in the chair with the arms because of her hip. She ate carefully. She did not speak much during the first hour. My father opened the conversation by saying that they'd spoken to a financial advisor, a detail offered like evidence, and that it made sense from an estate planning perspective to consolidate accounts now, while Amma was healthy enough to sign. Healthy enough to sign, Vikram repeated, nodding, as if he'd thought of it himself. Patti set down her spoon. How much is in the accounts? She asked. My father blinked. We'd need to look at. I know exactly how much is in them, she said. I'm asking if you do. The room was quiet for a moment. My cousin Anand, Vikram's youngest, was looking at the tablecloth. My mother said smoothly, Amma, this isn't about the money. This is about making sure you're protected. By whom? Patti asked. No one answered. I said, I'd like whatever arrangement is made to be reviewed by an independent attorney. My father's voice went cool. This is a family matter. Then it should be able to survive the scrutiny of a family attorney. That was when my father said, loudly enough that Anand flinched, that I had always made things difficult, that I thought I was better than everyone, that my grandmother had been his mother long before she was my cause, and that if I couldn't participate constructively, he'd prefer I don't participate at all. Patti's hands went still on the table. She looked at me. Not with distress. With confirmation. I stood up. I said, Patti, I'm leaving. You're welcome to come with me. She took 11 seconds to stand, I counted, and gathered her handbag and walked to where I was standing by the door. My mother said her name, sharp, like a command. Patti paused. I'll visit, she told my mother. When I'm invited as a guest. Anand almost said something. I saw it, his mouth opened then closed. He looked back at the tablecloth. I drove Patti home. Neither of us spoke until I pulled into her driveway. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, I said. I wanted to. She nodded once, like she was filing it away. Patti came to live with me 3 days later. She brought 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen things, and a small steel trunk, old dark green, with a latch that required a particular sideways pressure to open, that she placed in the corner of the guest room and didn't mention. I reorganized my second bathroom for her grab bars. I installed them myself on a Saturday morning. 3 bars medical grade, $47 each at the hardware supply on Fenwick. I rescheduled 2 site visits to accommodate her physiotherapy appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I drove her both ways. We listened to old Tamil film songs in the car, because she liked them, and because I was learning to. My parents called once in the first month. My mother said, with the particular gentleness of someone who knows they've already lost a position, that they were worried about the burden on me. I'm managing, I said. She should be with family. She is. The second call came from Vikram. He said that Patti had some valuable jewelry, and that it had always been the family's intention that it be shared equitably, and that he hoped I understood the complexity. Send your position in writing, I said. My attorney will respond. He didn't call again. Patti's physiotherapist was a young woman named Blessing who had the patience of someone who had chosen her work with great deliberateness. By December, Patti could walk to the end of the street and back without the walker. She was delighted by this in the particular way of someone who has earned each increment. She told me one evening, while we were making dinner, she insisting on chopping the onions because she said I held the knife like an engineer, which apparently meant wrong. The body remembers what it once knew. You just have to remind it. On the counter, next to the onions, sat the steel trunk. She'd brought it downstairs that morning without explanation. The latch had a small dent in its corner that I'd found myself looking at whenever I passed it. If there's any part of you wondering whether Patty's story ends where she wanted it to, subscribe now, so the rest of the story finds you when it's ready. Nalini Subramaniam died on a Tuesday in March, in her sleep, 9 months after she'd come to live with me. The cause was a stroke. She had gone to bed the night before having eaten the raisin she made herself, the one she said she'd never improved upon, and she had told me at the kitchen table. The old mahogany one, which I had moved from her house after she asked me to, because she said it should be where the cooking happened. That she had done everything she'd meant to do. I didn't know then what she meant. I found out 4 weeks later, when Gerald Osei called. He was the executor of her will. She had retained him in 2019, 3 years before her hip fracture, 3 years before the dinner, 3 years before my parents' first conversation about account access, and she had updated the document twice since then. The last update was dated September of the previous year, 6 weeks after she came to stay with me. Gerald Osei asked if I could arrange for my parents and my uncle to be present at a reading. I said yes. I set it for a Saturday afternoon in Patty's house, which was still in her name. I placed the steel trunk on the mahogany table in the center of the dining room. I made tea and set out cups because she would have wanted that. When they arrived, my parents and Vikram sat in the chairs along one side. I sat across from them. Gerald Osei sat at the head. He opened the folder. The estate, he explained, consisted of the house on Lakeview Terrace, valued at $340,000. 3 investment accounts totaling $218,000, which had been opened in Nalini's name alone in 1998, and had never been joint property. A savings account with $44,000, and a provident fund from her years of work at the textiles company before retirement, valued at $31,000. Total, $633,000. My mother said, "That can't be right." Gerald Osei said it was correct and documented. My father said, loudly enough that it carried. Those accounts were supposed to be family accounts. She said so. She always said so. She said, Gerald replied, with no inflection whatsoever, that the accounts were for the family. The will specifies the distribution. To Vikram, the Provident Fund, $31,000, outright. To my parents, $40,000, held in trust for documented medical expenses. The remainder, $562,000, the house and all of its contents, to Devi Subramaniam, with one condition, that the mahogany dining table never leave the family. My mother's voice broke. Not with grief. With something else. The sound a structure makes when a load-bearing assumption fails. My father's hands went still. Vikram stared at the table. His face did the thing that faces do when a person understands they are not who they believe themselves to be. That moment, I want to be precise about this, I did not find satisfying. It looked like pain. It was pain. He was not a monster. He was a man who had told himself a story for 40 years and had just been handed the revision. I opened the steel trunk. Inside, letters, documents, photographs, and a single folded paper at the top. Nalini's handwriting, in Tamil, dated the previous November. Gerald had already read and notarized a translated version. But I read the Tamil aloud. Everything I have I earned. Everything I gave was a gift, not an obligation. A gift given freely does not become a debt owed to the giver's children. Devi understood this. The table was always hers. I looked at my parents. I said, she told me once that the ones who take the most are always the most certain they deserve it. I think you should know she said that to me in this house, at this table, in 1997. She was already thinking about this. The word deserve. The word they had been using for 11 months about accounts and jewelry and arrangements. The word that had now become the instrument of the reading they'd just sat through. The legal process took 4 months. Gerald Osei filed in probate. My parents' attorney challenged the most recent amendment to the will, arguing undue influence. The court asked for evidence. There was none, only documentation of Patti's 2 prior updates, both predating my involvement, and her signed and witnessed statement of full capacity from her doctor, dated the same month as the amendment. The challenge was dismissed. Before the ruling, I called my father. I told him I was prepared to discuss a mediated settlement if he and my mother were willing to meet with a neutral party and agree to certain terms. He said he would not be lectured by his own daughter about his mother's wishes. I thanked him for his clarity and told Gerald Osei to proceed. Vikram accepted his disbursement and did not contest. We have not spoken since, but Anand, his youngest, the one who almost said something at that dinner, called me 2 months later. We met for coffee. He told me he'd been thinking about what happened. He didn't say much more than that. I didn't need him to. I did not sell the house on Lakeview Terrace. I rent it to a young couple, Mira and Rafiq, who are expecting their first child in August. Mira asked if she could plant marigolds along the front walk. I said yes. I said Patti would have liked that. The mahogany table is in my kitchen now. I had to rearrange the room slightly to fit it, move the island 18 inches toward the window, but it sits where it belongs, the scored edge from the cast iron pan still visible along one side. On Sunday mornings I make raisin. I've been making it from the recipe Patti kept on a note card in her handwriting, and I'm still not as good as she was, but I'm learning. Last week it smelled right for the first time. She told me the table should be where the cooking happens. That's where it is. Quiet dignity doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, choice by choice, year by year, in the unremarkable faithfulness of showing up. Sometimes it leaves something behind. Sometimes that something changes everything. If there's someone in your life who is being quietly overlooked, call them today. Not a text. A call. Ask if you can come by. Sit at whatever table they have. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment below. Tell me about someone who kept their promises without expecting recognition. Subscribe so these stories find you. I'll see you in the next one.